Hey guys, it's CC Garland here with Wholesaling House's Future Alliance. I hope you guys are having a fantastic day. Today, we are going to talk about analyzing a deal. This is one of my favorite things to look back and do after I close a deal because I get to learn about things that went smoothly, that went correctly in the process, and also some things that we can work on going forward. So I'm glad that you guys are coming along with me and we're going through this property together. We have a deal in Charlotte, North Carolina that I closed back in March. And the reason why I want to show you this deal in particular is because there were a lot of moving components in this deal that you probably would encounter too as you go along and start speaking with sellers. So a couple of times in this deal, it could have not have gone through. However, it required cooperation from the seller, the attorney, us, the wholesalers, and the buyer in order to get this thing to the finish line. So let's go ahead and jump into it. First off, I want to show you guys the HUD that we have here. So you know it's real, right? Numbers don't lie. So this is the HUD. This is the breakdown, essentially. If you haven't closed a deal yet, this is the breakdown of the numbers and who's getting paid at closing and where all the money is going. So what I like seeing, and whenever I get the HUD from my attorney, I go all the way to the bottom and I look at my assignment fee / consultation fee. So I split this deal in half with my joint venture partner. We have a 50-50 partnership in Charlotte. So he gets paid half of every assignment fee and I get paid half. So it was a $16,000 assignment. And so I took home $8K. He took home $8K. So here's his portion, and here's my LLC, Garland Enterprises LLC. We closed it up, put the money in the bank, put the money back into marketing, and we did some more together. So that's what you're supposed to do. So here's the HUD, and I'll probably post these in the group as well. I like people actually seeing what we're doing, and I like people knowing that we're actually closing deals out here. So a lot of people want to just educate and teach and act like they're closing deals, and they're not. All right, guys, so let's go over the numbers in this deal. But before we do that, let's talk about seller motivation. In every single transaction, you will need a seller that is motivated. I've had some properties that came across my desk and the numbers worked out perfectly. However, the seller wasn't super motivated to sell. We were offering the right price for the property. However, the seller just didn't want to sell at the time. And I've seen a lot of new wholesalers try to make deals work. And the reason why deals aren't going through is because the seller doesn't have any underlying motivation. If they're not returning your emails, if they're not returning your texts, if they're not returning your calls, right? It's going to be very difficult to get a property to the finish line. So you want to see a seller that picks up every time that you call or responds back every time you text. If they're unavailable, they're going to be the ones to try to move the deal forward. So that's what I like seeing. I like sellers blowing me up. Now, we will follow up with sellers, of course. That's one of the key things you need to do. But it's great seeing sellers take initiative and essentially try to sell themselves to you. Like, please take this property. If you have motivation, you could probably make a deal work, even if the numbers aren't that great. There's exit strategies out there, and we will discuss that a little bit later on as we progress in this group together. But for now, we're going to talk about wholesaling. That is our primary exit strategy. So the motivation was that she was a burnout landlord. She was ready to retire and she was ready to relax and stop being a landlord. I totally get it. This was a house that she lived in, but she since moved on to another house several years ago. So somebody else was just living in this property. The property had deferred maintenance. It was built in the 1930s and it needed, I wouldn't say a lot of work, but just a full rehab. And most often, if properties are built before the 1960s, the repairs that are needed are going to be a lot. And then it might be a situation where it needs more than cosmetic work. And cosmetic work, I mean paint, carpet, new tile, new hardwood floors, new roof, like that. You may encounter asbestos in a house that was built before 1960. You may encounter foundational issues, framing issues. You just never know. So we always like to pad our repair estimate whenever we're working with properties that are built before 1960. So I'll show you as we do our formula how the numbers broke down, and you sort of get an indication too based on where this is located. The Mayo formula of 70 cents of the ARV minus repairs may or may not be applicable. It just comes down to what the buyer will pay. So I'll explain that here shortly. So our offer price on this property was $197, and we took home a $16K assignment fee. So I'm going to show you how we got all of these numbers, starting with the ARV. So let's go ahead and hop over into Zillow, and let me know, guys, if you want me to create another video basically explaining how I generate my ARV. Understanding and mastering this is really important. And this is the difference between you contracting a property or passing on it. When I first started out, I passed on a lot of properties because I didn't know how to generate my ARV that well. And so months later, I would call the seller and they would say that they sold to another investor. I wasn't really comfortable with analyzing properties at that point. But as you analyze more and more houses and give more and more offers and become more and more familiar with your market, you will understand what you need to contract properties at, and you won't miss out on any deals because you don't know what to contract them at. So here's a property, 1309 North Davison Street in Charlotte. So you can see that it was sold for $215,000. That's when we sold it. I know we contracted for $197, but they also added in our assignment fee here. Some areas don't do that. Some areas only list what the purchase price of your contract with that seller was. However, in North Carolina, in Charlotte, it actually lists what the property was contracted for plus your assignment fee. So let's look around and see how I came up with 320. I have a couple of filters on, but I'm going to take these filters off, and it could get pretty messy here, especially if you're in an area that has a lot of activity. So let me go ahead and refresh this page here, and okay, so I had a $300,000 filter on it, so done. All right, so we see a lot of properties here near my subject property, and it could get a little bit confusing because you may say, how do I calculate the ARV? The first thing you're looking for is the square footage being similar to your property. So the square footage of our property, 1309 North Davison, is 1240. What we're going to do here is I like staying between 10 to 20% of the subject property square footage. So we're going to do 1500. And if it's 1240, I'm not going to go below 1000 square feet. So 1000 to 1500, that's good. The next thing we want to make sure we're looking at are properties that are actually built around the same time as your house. Usually, if a house is built after 1960, I would look between increments of 1960 to 70, 70 to 80, like 10-year increments of your subject property. However, properties built before 1960, I sort of lump those all together. So what I'm going to do is add another filter here with the year built. And I'm going to put a maximum of let's go 1950 on this. And that narrows it down quite a bit. And you always want to be looking at recently sold properties. Now, what I may do, I may click properties that are listed if I'm not seeing any properties that have been completely rehabbed. However, I try to not do that and just look at the recently sold properties because these are homes that investors and homeowners actually paid for. You could have a house that's listed for $1 million, but there could be no offers on it, right? So we want to look at properties that actually sold. Those are how you get your comparable sales. Also notice, I'm not going very far out here. Even this view is a little bit too high for me. I like getting very, very close to my subject property. I have a lot of people that ask me, hey, Cece, how far should I pull my comparable sales? Should I go a half mile out, a mile out, 0.2 miles out. Really, there is no specific mileage that I use. I do it relative to the landmarks of the property, right? So this is what I mean. If my property's here on North Davison Street and there are comparable sales across this main street here, you see how thick this street is on the map? I'm not going to look at properties over here, even if they're a mile away. This is a completely different area, completely different neighborhood than the one that we're looking at right here. It was built in probably a completely different time frame. So you need to look very, very closely to where your property is located. So honestly, I would not venture out further than this area where I'm hovering my mouse over right here. And I don't even like pulling comparable sales when the map looks like this. I like going down to the satellite view. If I could find comparable sales, about 3 or 4 solid comparable sales with this view, I know that my comps will be very accurate. However, sometimes you have to go further out. So I'm seeing a lot of properties selling for $250,000, right, and $260,000. So let's click around and see what these properties look like. All right, 1,400 square feet, about the same square footage as ours. Click around. Okay, this looks like it's been rehabbed. However, it looks like it's been lived in. It looks like it's been rehabbed but lived in, and somebody else moved out. The reason why I say that is after you've looked at a couple of these properties, you'll get a strong indication of what a property looks like that's just been rehabbed. So if it's staged, meaning that there's furniture in it and it looks like an HGTV house, then that tells me that it was completely rehabbed. However, in this picture right here, I'm seeing a curtain rod. What does that tell me? It's used. Somebody rehabbed this property a couple years ago and they lived in it. Now, I'm not saying this is a bad property to look at, but it's not going to be the same as a property that was completely just renovated and is ready for a first-time homeowner. It's not brand new. It looks great, but not the type of property we're looking for here. But that's a good basis. All right, so let's go clicking around a little bit more. This one for $262 here. Same thing. It's I could tell it's been rehabbed probably in the last 5 or 6 years. However, it's not a completely new rehab. Look at the flooring here. It's scuffed up a little bit. Let's click around a little bit more. All right, so I see a property for $310. Let's open this one up. All right, so yeah. So it could be the same thing. However, I'm liking what I see here far as this being $310 as a comparable sale. So it's fully remodeled. And this sold in the summer too. And usually when it sells in the summer, property values are a little bit higher. This one sold for $395, and I could tell this has been completely rehabbed. So as you're seeing, I'm literally going and just looking at pictures to see the condition of the property. If I open up a house and there's no pictures, that tells me it's probably in as-is condition. It might be in cash value condition, or it might just be dated, but there's no way to tell. Usually if a property has been fully rehabbed, you'll have pictures here. Okay, so as I did the comps and as my joint venture partner talked to his buyer, we got a strong indication of what he'd pay for the house. And really, in an area like this, this is hot. This is a hot area in Charlotte. I mean, every 6 months, property values are almost, I wouldn't say doubling, but they're increasing quite a bit. Essentially, the whole area is being developed right now, which is great for property values. We determined that our buyer will probably pay around $215,000 for the property based on an ARV of 320. And he actually went up a little bit far as the year built, which allowed for some more comps to be taken in consideration. So what I'm going to do is actually add a minimum price filter, and I'll actually show you some of the comps that he was looking at to determine if he would buy this house or not at that price. So that 310 and this 395 were two of the ones that he was looking at. We also see a 304 here. We see a 365. So really 320 is conservative. Now, I would say when you're doing your comparable sales, you want to be very, very conservative, right? So I would not suggest looking at the highest comparable sale. Like if you only see one property that sold for 360 and everything else in renovated condition is selling for 170, I mean, you're going to have to go with that one, because that property that sold for that highest price range, if there's only one, that's an outlier. That's not the norm. Now, see, we have a healthy balance of properties that are rehab selling for 260, 310, 395. So at this point, it'll be helpful to have a buyer in your back pocket that you trust to go to them and say, hey, man, what would you pay for this property and it has his condition? And what do you think it'll ARV for? That's exactly what we did. So basically, we reversed wholesaled, which means we saw how much our buyer would pay, and then we went back to our seller and contracted at a price where we can make a decent spread. So there's no guessing involved. As soon as the seller agreed to 197, we knew we made 16K. As soon as they signed the contract. That's the beautiful thing about doing deals like this and having buyers that you can go to. So this is how we determine our offer. Now, I wish it was set in stone and I could tell you, step 1, do this. Step 2, do this. However, that's not going to be the case all the time. You might have to go back and forth between the seller and buyer. Sometimes you may just have to take an estimated guess and say, hey, well, I think I could contract the property at this price. Let me see if I could take this to my buyer and they'll pay it. Now, I would caution you this. Do not contract deals with the intent of lowering the price. That is unethical. You're tying up somebody's asset, one of their biggest assets, probably the biggest asset in their life. And they're thinking that you're going to perform and you're going to go out and lock up their property and not know if you can perform. See, that's how, and that's why investors are getting a bad name and have a bad name out here. So we're out here to change this in the Future Alliance Wholesaling Group through education. So please, please don't just lock up properties and not even know if you're going to be able to move them at that price. There's a difference of having 80 to 90% certainty. And then there's a complete difference with you just guessing that you can wholesale the property. So please keep that in mind. So let's go back to our sheet here. 320K ARV, 30K in repairs. Really, we put the repairs probably around 40K. We wanted to add a buffer here, but 30K with the right contractor will get the job done. 10K buffer. There in this price range, there's still enough room for the rehabber. Because when you're talking about a 320K ARV, there's a little bit more room for padding. Now, it'll be different if the ARV was 100K and repairs were 30K. Number one, we probably wouldn't have walked away with a 16K assignment fee because there's not enough spread there for our buyer unless we contracted it dirt low at like 20K. But in this particular situation, the numbers worked out for us to make the assignment fee that we wanted. Now let's talk about some of the struggles with this property. What was our biggest issue with closing it? It was the tenant. And I would tell you guys now, if you've done a few deals, you will be nodding your head at this. If you haven't, just wait and see. This is going to be one of the most frustrating things. You have your buyer in place and your seller is ready to sell. However, the tenant needs to move. That's the most frustrating thing ever. You could give them cash for keys. However, you probably need to wait 30 days and let them move out. In most states, it's actually the law to give them a 30-day notice. And just think how you would feel if you were renting a property and then somebody just said, hey, you need to get out tomorrow, and you've been staying in the house for 3, 4, maybe even 5 years. That wouldn't sit well with you. So give them 30 days. Most of these sellers, they will not push back. They'll move out of the property, and they understand, and they'll move. You just have to give them a little bit of time. And sometimes they'll move a lot quicker. Usually if you tell them on the first of the month, they'll move out by the second week or third week of the month. So that was the most frustrating part for us. It was just trying to figure out a time for the tenant to move out, because we pretty much had the deal done in the first or second week of February. We were just waiting for them to move and then title to come back and all of that. So a key takeaway here is that motivation is a must. We had seller motivation, which was great. It was awesome. So we had to make sure we pulled our comps correctly. So you can see here, if you don't have your filters here, the comps could be everywhere. And you might need to consult your buyer before contracting the deal to make sure you have a good deal here. And you're not screwing yourself out of an assignment fee. If we would have contracted it higher, the seller would have gone lower, and we would have lost out on our assignment fee. But we knew what our spread was by going to our buyer and actually him agreeing to what he would pay for that house. So it's great to have a buyer like that, just a few of them, because you don't want to push your deal out to everybody and a whole bunch of buyers and not have it under contract. I don't advise that. But in certain situations with buyers you've done deals with before, I suggest doing it. So yeah, definitely getting your ARV correctly, and knowing that if you're in an area that's rapidly growing and there's a lot of construction happening, say you're seeing coffee shops pop up, you're seeing a lot of new age restaurants and grocery stores like Whole Foods. Now that's a sign that an area is developing, but realize that on one street, that street may have not developed or increased in property value like the street where your subject property is on. So remember that, and remember just to look at the street view of these properties before you contract them and you agree on a price with the seller. Because then again, you could be passing on deals, or you may be offering too much. It works both ways. And this is a big thing I want to mention, guys. Now, when a lot of people get into wholesaling, they want to get into it and think they can make cash in 30 days or 7 days. That's true. But you have to be realistic and realize you're running a business here. The typical lead cycle of a lead is about 45 to 60 days, meaning from lead input to closure. So I'll go here on my lead sheet, and you'll see this lead came in around the third week of January. So she came in the third week of January. That's when we sent the offer off. The deal closed in, okay, I have it actually right here. Let me push this up. So it closed around the third week of March. So what does that tell us? That's a 2-month, around 60-day cycle. It closed a few days before the 21st, but Zillow registers it a little bit later. But let's just say 60 days. So from that time we sent the seller the initial text to negotiating with them to following up with them to closing, it took 2 months. I would tell you, this is where most wholesalers fall off. They think they could talk to a seller once and the seller will agree to the price and they'll want to sign that day. Guys, it takes anywhere from 5 to 12 contacts to get your seller comfortable with signing a contract with you, especially if you're new and you don't have any sort of credibility built up. If you haven't wholesaled any deals, if you're not really confident on the phone, realize you're just a regular Joe. You're a stranger to them. And you have to realize too, there's other wholesalers out here giving us a bad name. So these sellers have been contacted before by other wholesalers. And guess what? They might have held up their property, said they were going to get them a certain price, and what? They didn't close. So what does that do? That screws us over, the honest wholesalers that are actually out here doing it and trying to do the right thing. So you just have to make sure that you're building up rapport. How do you do that? following up with the seller consistently. Just because they don't agree to sign today doesn't mean it's a no tomorrow, right? So a no today is not a no tomorrow. I've followed up with sellers, 100 times, no lie, and contracted deals. This is a marathon, not a sprint. If you're doing wholesaling, look at it like a career, not a get rich quick type thing. It's not that. This is a career. Treat it like a job. So actually look at this like, hey, I'm in this for the long run. And if you are, that time will go by really quickly because you're going to be working other leads. I woke up one day and my closing attorney emailed my partner and I and said, hey, we're clear to close. It was great. I wasn't even expecting that. Why? Because I was working 30, 40 other deals at the time. So every day I get an email. Hey, Cece, we're clear to close. Boom. Send over my wiring instructions. Money's in my account before the close of business. It's awesome. So don't fall in love with one deal and don't have a handful of deals you're working. Have multiple deals you're working and follow up with your deals on a regimented cycle. And I will discuss with you guys later, basically our overall process with screening our leads, adding them to our CRM, following up with them, and when we actually put contracts down on property. So guys, that's an overview of this deal right here. I hope this is helpful. I want to do more of these for you guys. If you found it helpful, like this post, give me some feedback, and I will do these basically as I'm closing deals. I don't want to do analysis on properties that I just closed because our rehabbers are still flipping them and I'm trying to respect their privacy and stuff. But, deals a couple months back, I'm more than willing to show them to you guys. So if you like seeing this, let me know and I'll post more content. So thank you guys so much for joining the group, the current members, the future members, everybody who will join. We appreciate you being here and we hope you are getting a lot of value out of this group. Look forward to chatting with you guys next time.